Hi all. Okay, so today we're going to be doing a beaded Christmas ornament, and this one, it's cobalt blue and the frosted matte, well, the matte crystal. And for me, I designed this one actually for my son, and for me the pattern just reminds me so much of the Navy signal flags from when I was in the service. And so I've named this one Nautical, which, in case anybody was wondering, why do I call it Nautical? That's the reason. Okay, so let's get started. So this is just a standard white ornament, and you'll see that it's a sequence of just the cobalt blue and the matte frosted, and actually these are the beads I'm using. So this is it. The transparent cobalt, it's a Miyuki, it's an 11-0. I'm using the matte transparent crystal, also Miyuki, it's an 11-0 bead. And I'm using, for this one, I'm going to be using the Bugle 2, the 6mm white pearl. Okay. And so I've already got my selection of beads right here, and I'll be using these to actually do the collar. All right. Also, I'm using, this is a number 12 needle, beading needle, and I've got the waxed beading thread. I've already measured this out, and this is roughly 2 wingspans for me, and considering I'm 6 feet tall, I've actually added an extra foot. So this is roughly 13 feet of thread. And I like to go a little over on the amount of thread just to make sure I don't run short when I get to the end. Also, I'll be, scissors for snipping thread at the end. And this is my favorite little tool. It's a bead stop. So I'll be attaching this to the end of my thread, and we'll only be using the bead stop long enough to build the first part of the ornament, which is the collar. And when we get to the end of the ornament, we'll be finishing it off in the same way that I did this one, with this circle of beads, pulling everything tight to where everything fits nice and close to the ornament. And these are glass ornaments that I use. I exclusively use glass ornaments. Okay, so let's get this extra stuff out of the way. And we'll get started. Oh, and the beading thread that I use, okay, this is my favorite waxed beading thread. I'm having trouble actually finding more of it, so it's called the Silamade size C. So really any waxed beading thread that you can get will work. I also have the KO beading thread in my stash, and I use this a lot as well. Mostly because I'm almost running out of this, and once this is gone, it is sadly gone, and I will be heartbroken. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll start with putting this in a dish to help it stop from rolling around, and maybe it will behave itself and stand like it's supposed to stand. Okay, so first off, we're going to create the collar, which is 9 of the bugle beads alternated with 9 of the cobalt seed beads. And the collar actually has 2 rows involved in it. So the first row is just the setting up the base, and we're going to pull the beads all the way down to our stopper, and then we're going to actually lace back through all of these beads to create a loop. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bugle beads and their corresponding 9 cobalt beads to go in between. And I do try to put a little bit of tension on the thread, so when I'm pulling it through, I'm going through the beads and not through the thread itself, that I'm staying in the upper portion of that gap between the thread and the bead. Okay, so now I'm going to pull my thread all the way up, preferably without tangling it, because we actually are using a very long piece of thread for this, and watching to make sure you don't get tangled or knots forming in your thread is really important. Like right there, the thread just looped around itself, created a bit of a knot, but it did slide through, so that didn't create a problem for this step. All right, so we're just going to close our loop and at this point we don't need our little bead stop tool anymore, because we're going to tie a surgeon's knot to close our loop, and we're just going to ease the thread to close that gap. We don't want to close it 100%. We want to leave a little bit of space right there. It's not much, but we do want to test it and make sure it's going to slide over the top of our ornament, and we're good. Yay. Okay, so now I'm going to tie a surgeon's knot to finish this off, so we know that we're not going to have any slippage from in our collar as we work the next stage of it. So the surgeon's knot goes around a couple of times, cinch it up, and back down. Okay, so that's the first step for the collar. Okay, so now we're going to take on the next step for the collar. And for this, we're going to be creating a bunch of chevrons. But the first thing I want to do is I want to get away from this little joint here that we've created with the intersection of the beads, because that's just going to make things look a little bit messy later on. So I'm just going to go through one cobalt, a bugle bead, and a cobalt, just to come out going left from another cobalt bead, just so I can actually pull that knot in, and I tucked it in behind that bead, so it's not going to be visible later on. In a little bit, we'll actually take this thread and go back through the top part of the collar to bury it so it's not in our way while we're working the rest of the ornament. So now we're going to do the rest of the collar. So the rest of the collar is going to be a series of 9 chevrons created by a bugle bead, a cobalt, and a second bugle bead. And what we're going to be doing is then we're just going to run our thread through the next cobalt bead, pull it through, taking care not to let things tangle up. As you go further in the ornament, obviously you'll have used more of your thread, and the issue of excess thread should not be a problem anymore. It's just getting to that point. Between now and then, you have to be careful with your thread so it does not tangle up. We're going to complete the rest of this section of the collar off camera, and we'll be back in a bit. Alright, so we've finished the rest of the second row of the collar to where it's got all 9 of its little V-shaped sections, and we've connected, we've tied the little knot to secure the section so it's not going to come unloose, and gone through the first bugle bead and the cobalt bead at the end to step up our thread. Also, we've embedded the tail within the first row of the collar, so now it's out of the way. And I'm actually using a little coil of quartz for the ball ornament to sit on, so it'll hopefully behave itself and remain stable for the rest of this process. Okay, so now we're going to start our rows of the seed beads, and there's going to be 13 rows in total. The first row is like we see on our example here, is a matte crystal bead, 3 cobalts, a matte crystal, a cobalt, a matte crystal, 3 cobalts, and a matte crystal. And it's going from the cobalt bead at the tip of one color tip to the next color tip. And I do work from right to left because I'm right-handed. You can work whichever direction that is most comfortable for you, but that's the only reason I'm working right to left. It's not a requirement to do it in this sequence. All right, let's get going. Okay, so that's our sequence. Matte, 3 cobalt, matte, cobalt, matte, 3 cobalt, matte. And I'm referring, when I say matte, I'm referring to the matte transparent crystal bead. Okay, so then we're just going to thread it through the next cobalt bead and bring all of our thread through. And just adjust it so we know our little cobalt bead here in the center is going to be presenting itself to where we can easily thread through it for the next row. Okay, so let me tilt that up so you can see that a little better. Alright, so now we're going to do the next section. Alright, so at this point we're going to fast forward now for you guys so you can see this go a little quicker. For me, I get the slow route. See you in a a bit. Okay, so this is the last section of the 1311131 sequence for the beads for this row. I'm going to go back through the cobalt bead that we originally came out of to start the row. Alrighty, so you just have to be careful, not let your ornament try to escape before it's done. It also helps if I put the collar back on the ornament in the correct direction. Such fun. All right. Always good to make sure after a mishap like that that you sort out all of your threads so you're not going to inadvertently tie a crazy knot that you don't want. Alrighty, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go around and sort things out a bit and actually give each section an extra tug. I'm looking for excessive slack so as not to cause weird gaps between our beads, and there's a little bit there. So now I've pulled it all out, so I'm happy with the positioning of all my beads, and to make sure I don't lose this tension, which is not super tight but just enough to keep things to where there's not weird gaps. Okay, so now we're going to tie another knot. So it's just an easy knot, just slipping your needle along behind to where the knot is going to land between this cobalt bead and this matte translucent crystal bead. All right, simple enough little knot, and then we're going to thread through the translucent bead, the cobalt's translucent, and come out at the tip of this section at the cobalt bead, and this is how we step down for our next row. Okay, hopefully I won't throw the ball off my workstation again. All right, so now we're going to do row number 2 of the seed bead section. So this is going to be basically a white, 4 cobalts, a white, a cobalt, a white, 4 cobalts, and a white. And I know there's a clear transparent mats, and I may transpose my references to things. I will try to be consistent. So we're gonna go, we'll behave. So matte translucent crystal, 4 cobalts, matte translucent, cobalt, matte translucent, and that's the center of our section, and then the 4 cobalts. and the matte translucent. So that's our sequence. And as we go down the bead, you'll notice that obviously it's round, so the circumference gets larger as you go down, which is why we increase the bead count as we're moving down. Okay, so we're just going to thread through the cobalt at the point of the next section over from the prior row and pull it up. And this is starting to create our repeating pattern. Alright, so I'm going to continue this row around and I'll see you at the other end. Alright, so here we are at the last section for this row, pulling my thread up. Now I'm going to go around holding onto my thread, straightening out my beads and looking for the excess slack and trying to pull it through to the last section so I can get it all the way out. There we go. Alright, and I'm happy with the way those beads are turning out so far. And now we're going to tie another knot just by going back behind and coming through, and our knot is going to land right between this cobalt bead where we just came out of and right ahead of this matte frosted crystal bead. Pull that up, and that's going to hold our thread securely. And now we're going to step down to the next row by going through the matte transparent, the 4 cobalts, the matte transparent, and coming out the cobalt at the tip of this section. Alright, so our next row is going to have 5 cobalt beads in the middle section. So we're going from 3 to 4 and now 5. So it's the 1 matte transparent crystal, 5 cobalts, a matte transparent crystal, a cobalt, a matte transparent crystal. That creates our center point. 5 cobalts, and finishing up with a matte transparent crystal. So that's our sequence for this row. And as usual, as in all the prior rows, we're going through the cobalt bead at the center of the next section over from the prior row. I'll learn how to talk later. Okay. And thread created a little knot for itself, but fortunately it didn't cause an issue catching on my coil. could have caused an issue. Alrighty, so there we go. That's the first section of this row, and again I'm going to continue this row on fast forward for you, and we'll be back when we get to the other end. Alright, so here's our last section of the matte transparent crystal, 5 cobalt beads, matte transparent crystal, 1 cobalt, 1 matte transparent crystal, 5 cobalts, and 1 matte transparent crystal. So that will complete this row. And again, I will go around to each section, straightening out the beads, giving it a bit of a tug to pull any excess slack towards the section I just did, and pull that out. And now we're going to tie our knot again to secure the row. And then we're going to step down by going through the matte transparent crystal, the 5 cobalts, 1 matte transparent crystal to come out the cobalt at the tip of the section. And that's how we step down for the next row. So this row, as you probably have guessed already, is in our cobalt section, is actually going to get 6 beads. And that's actually going to be it for this part of the pattern. Then we're going to jump to the next part of the pattern when we get to the row after this one. So this one again is 1 matte transparent, and it's going to be 6 of the cobalts. One matte transparent, 1 cobalt, 1 matte transparent, 6 more cobalts, and finish up with the matte transparent. So as you can see, as we go, we're having consistency in the aesthetic look of the loops that we're creating with this pattern. And so, and they're following the curvature of the ball. Oh, and a quick note in case anybody's wondering about this little dish I'm using. This is actually just a soy sauce dish that I got at World Market. So I like using this one when I'm using a white or the matte transparent bead, so I can actually knock the beads around a bit and I can see the hole in the bead easier when it's on a colored background. So, but that's me, you know, I'm weird. I like to use different things. I don't follow convention all the time. All right, so now we're going to fast forward through the rest of this row, and I'll see you at the end. All right, so here's the last section, and as you've noticed, I actually review my bead sequence before I slide it off. That way I know if I've made a mistake, I can fix it really quick before it becomes more of a challenge. And the question is, have I ever made a mistake while doing an ornament like this? And the answer is yes. I actually have gone back on prior ornaments and realized that I had a miscount on one of my rows, and by that time it's too late to fix it. I just have to live with the fact that that particular ornament is not perfect. But that's okay, because neither am I. Alrighty, so then we're tying our knot to finish up our row, and now we're getting into the exciting part. So now we're stepping down again to the center cobalt bead on the row we just completed, just so we're in position. I'm going to turn that around so I stop running into that little bit over there. This little coil of cords is really helping on holding the ball in position to where I can work on it, and hopefully you can see it better. Sometimes when I'm working by myself, I use a small dish, and yes, it does roll around a lot. This is actually helping. I'll probably continue to use this coil going forward in the future. It's now become one of my favorite little tools. It's a coil from my dad's stash, so those are all so precious to me. Okay, so now we're starting into the next part of our pattern, which is 3 of the transparent crystal, matte transparent crystal, 3 cobalts, 3 matte transparent crystal, a cobalt for the center, 3 matte transparent crystals, 3 cobalts, and 3 matte transparent crystals. And we're going to repeat this pattern for 1, 2, 3, 4 rows to create this effect in the center of the ornament. So let's get going. And at the end of each section, I'm going to be doing the same thing, going around, pulling out the slack, tying a knot, and moving on. So let's do it. Let's get our first bit here. So those are 3 matte transparent crystals, 3 cobalts, 3 matte transparent crystals, a cobalt. This is our center bead for the section. 3 transparent crystals, 3 more cobalts, and then 3 more of the matte transparent crystals. Okay, so that's our sequence. And again, we're using the center cobalt bead from the prior row. And again, watch your thread, make sure it's not wrapping around itself and creating a knot. Okay, so that's that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward here to where we're finished with this section. So we'll have all 4 rows of this going down, and then we'll get back to repeating this area below this area. That will make this whole thing a little quicker for you guys. So be with you in a bit. Okay, so there's all of our beads. And we should give you an accurate count of beads used in this ornament when we're finished. Okay, so as in all the prior sections, I'm giving each little part on this row a bit of a tug to get out any slack there may be. Alrighty. Now we're going to tie our knot in our usual junction right after the cobalt bead that we just came out of and before the matte transparent bead of the first section of this row. And now we're going to step down again all the way down to the center cobalt bead. Alright, so now our rows are going to diminish in size, and each ball, even though they're supposed to be uniform in size, is slightly different from the prior one. And typically this next row looks like there's only going to be room for a couple more rows on this ball. So this next row I'm going to be doing with the 4 cobalt beads, and we'll see how this comes out because we are getting close to the end. Usually sometimes when I'm doing this particular pattern, if I notice that my ball is a little smaller than most, I'll skip this row here and then just start back with these for the step down. But I wanted you to see the full pattern for these, and I believe having just a couple rows of this at the bottom will not diminish the ornament at all. So if your glass ornament is slightly bigger, the step down rows should be 5, 4, 3, and then you'll see the final row. But this time we're going to skip directly to the 4 and see if we have 1 or 2 more rows after that. Okay, so let's get going. So sometimes you just gotta roll with the punches on this one. Okay, so we're doing the 1 matte transparent crystal, 4 cobalts, 1 matte transparent crystal, 1 cobalt, 1 matte transparent crystal, 4 cobalts, and 1 matte transparent crystal. And it looks like this is actually going to be the right choice here, going to the 4 instead of starting with 5 and then proceeding with 4, because we're really close to the center bottom of this ornament. So I'm going to complete this row and we'll see you at the end of it. And another influence on having to adjust for the variation in the ball size is also the beads. As we all know, there are different variations in bead size. They're not always going to be 100% perfectly the same size bead, no matter how good the manufacturer is. And because of the slight variation in the bead sizes and the slight variation in the ball size, this is where you have to actually adjust as you go, just by seeing your results And now we're stepping down to the next row. So our next row is going to be, you can see that we're starting to pull in towards the center of the ornament now. And hopefully by now it's less likely our beads will slide off the ornament. Anyway, so our next row is going to be the 1 matte transparent, 3 cobalts, the matte transparent, the cobalt matte transparent, 3 more cobalts, and a matte transparent. So that's the sequence for this row, and there will be one final row after this, and it will be the one that pulls everything together tightly at the bottom. And yeah, so I'm pulling my thread taut just so I can give this a bit of a tug and see how things are going to look when we get to the final row. And I do like the way that's actually coming out, so we're doing good. So we're going to fast forward again to the end of this row. Alright, so here's the last section of this row. So it's the 1 matte transparent crystal, 3 cobalts, the 1 matte transparent crystal, the cobalt, the 1 matte transparent crystal, 3 cobalts again, and finishing off with the 1 matte transparent crystal. Alright, and while holding our thread, I'm going to go around and start pulling out any excess slack from the prior sections on this row. So when we get back here, just pull it all out. There's all nice and firm the way we want it, and we're going to tie a knot to secure it. And again, our knot will always fall between the cobalt bead that we just came out of and the first matte transparent bead of the first section of the row that we've just completed. Now we're going to step down again to the center cobalt bead, and this is when we're going to start closing it up. And let's see, definitely we'll be needing a few more cobalt beads, so let me get some more out of the tube for myself. That should more than do it. Okay, so we're going to have 1 transparent, and we're going to alternate between the cobalt and the matte transparent, and the cobalt, that's our center bead for the section, matte transparent, cobalt, and a matte transparent. So what we've done is we've repeated the same sequence we've been doing all along in this section, to where it's matte transparent, cobalt, 3 centers, which is the matte transparent, cobalt matte transparent, and then cobalt matte transparent. It's just on this one, the cobalts are single instead of multiples. So we're going to see how this turns out, and this should be our final row. Let me pull that in, and yeah, I think that's actually going to work, to where that's pulling in nicely, and we'll get around the whole thing. Alright, here's our last section, And the easiest way to remember this one is that you've got 3 blues and they're all flanked by the transparent mats. So that's an easy way to keep track of how you're doing this last row. And we're just going to pull it through the cobalt bead right here in the center and give everything a firm tug. Pull it up tight, and I'm going to tie a knot, and then I'm going to go around another time on the bottom just to give it a little extra security. And the challenge here is remembering where you started. So I'm going to try to hold my thumb there so I don't forget where I started at. And just rethread through all of the beads in this row, trying to stay in frame so you see what I'm doing. And at this point, if you sew through the beading thread, it's not going to be a horrible thing. So don't worry about that possibility. Alright, and then the last little section, and we get back to where we started. And again, we're going to pull our thread tight, tie one more knot, and now we're going to embed our thread going up through the upper section just for about an inch or so. You don't have to go terribly far. Gonna snip it off. The end pulls back down inside the bead because you'll have snipped it off while pulling it with a little bit of tension. Alright, and there you go. There's the ornament. It's what I call the nautical pattern because it, like I said, it reminds me somewhat of signal flags when I was in the service. So anyway, I hope you like this. Please subscribe to my channel. Do comment, and if you make this, I would like to see your results. And so thank you and bye.